Thanks to his recent victory in Spanish language Scrabble, a language he does not speak, major news outlets are picking up on something that competitive players have known for decades. Nigel Richards is Scrabble's final boss. That's why it's so inspiring to see other elite players raise their games and give him a true test. And in this video, I'll take you through one of my favorite examples. World number 2, David Eldar's unforgettable battle against the GOAT at the 2017 World Championship. The 35-round main event that year was followed by an 8-player finals bracket. David barely squeaked into the bracket thanks to his tiebreaker, whereas Nigel wound up in his familiar spot at the very top of the standings. Nigel goes first in their quarterfinal match, and with the aid of the first blank, he plays Cyaloid for 68. David's got good letters too, and he plays his top scoring bingo of Alarions for 82 in response. Next, Nigel draws the Z, and he has solid options like Zoea for 50 points. Instead, in classic Nigel fashion, he plays Oka for 26. The idea here is to create a huge spot for the Z with a guaranteed Ms for 65 to follow next turn if the spot stays open. David draws the second blank, but only one vowel. If he senses something off about Oka, he could play Veg, leaving only consonants. Instead, he plays the more standard Veg for 15, keeping his valuable vowel. Nigel draws poorly, and while he still gets his 65-point follow-up on the board, he heads into next turn with 4 vowels on his rack. Of course, David has the opposite problem, which he tries to fix with half-did for 30, while Nigel barely stays afloat with Ein for 22. Both players' struggles continue, with David forced to exchange after drawing even more consonants, and Nigel playing Emu for just 7 after drawing more vowels. Players this good eventually break loose, as David bingos with Enroots for 71, Nigel makes the lovely overlap of Buys for 50, and David answers immediately with a second bingo of Coggles for 79. Nigel's vowel problems return, but after another overlap of O for 32 and David's elegant response of Tway for 45, Nigel bingos with Oracle to take a narrow lead. Down 14 points, David has a tricky decision holding the X and 2 sets of duplicated vowels. Just dropping the X leaves a terrible rack for next turn, and Axe gets hammered by overlaps. Axed in the other direction seems like a solid alternative. Instead, David plays Amir for 34, a fantastic choice. Prior to Amir, many of the highest scoring consonants remaining in the pool play in this spot, like the F, P, and Y. Any 5-letter words reaching the double word score will score upwards of 50 points. Axed only partially blocks this spot. As an extra bonus, David will still have a spot to dump his X next turn, and his leave of AIX could give him taxi hooking Trafe with a T draw. Nigel responds with Botted for 40, and with time dwindling both in the game and on David's clock, he plays his top scoring move of Ixnay for 40. This move gives heavy scores back to Nigel, but if Nigel has clunky tiles, it could catch him off guard. With only 4 tiles left in the bag, Nigel does have a 60-point play here of Japs, but it would empty the bag, allowing David to execute a winning endgame fairly often, especially if he has the FR combo for Hauff and Tater. Many players would play Jop here, setting up an S-hook and scoring decently. Nigel instead plays the stunning Yup for only 8. Nigel has the last S, and Yups is a valid word, so this move puts a huge amount of pressure on David to navigate a challenging situation. In fact, David does have FR, and he could play several different words for nearly 50 points, but with this new threat lurking, he has to reconsider. He doesn't really have a way to address the new spot that also scores well, so he needs to improvise. The key tile here is the unplayed Q. David has to ask himself, would Nigel really play Yup if he also had the Q, given that he would also have had an easy way to dump it for 32 points? Maybe, but the odds could be much higher than usual that the Q is still in the bag, and drawing it would be a death sentence for him. So he makes a brilliant move here. just Hauf for 26, rather than a longer word hooking tater. This gives him one final chance to dodge the Q if it's still in the bag, while keeping the required letters to threaten several bingos that would outrun S hooking plays, including Dipterin if he draws either the A or the N from the bag. After Hauf, there's one tile left in the bag, and Nigel has a free shot at his S setup. He makes his best move of Vans for 60. This move wins 6 out of 8 possible endgames, only losing if the Q or T are the final tile in the bag. Unfortunately for Nigel and luckily for David, that final tile is in fact the Q. David successfully dodged it by playing Hauf, drawing the R instead and giving him one other sneaky threat, the non-bingo triple-triple of pre-dried through ED for 108 points. Clearly already aware of this possibility, he quickly plays it after Vans to steal victory from the jaws of defeat. After one more endgame move apiece, David Eldar ends up winning this pivotal Game 1. He made several incredibly impressive plays here, especially Hauf, giving him a chance to dodge the toxic Q that was in fact waiting there to lose him the game while generating a creative winning pathway against the best player in the world. Needing just one more win to advance, David holds a narrow lead after 3 turns apiece in Game 2, but Nigel has both blanks. With more commonly seen bingos like Outwears available, he plays the significantly more obscure Tutworks for a 4-point sacrifice. This move is more stylish, but it's also much better defensively, leaving David little to work with on the resulting board. With 3 sets of duplicated tiles, he plays Nay for 14 and Guns for a bingo, while Nigel blocks the board further with Goal for 18. David draws well and has some playable bingos here, but spots by far his best choice of the 9-letter Tranciest for 86, opening this closed board back up again for the time being. Holding good bingo tiles and the X, Nigel takes an aggressive approach here with Ticks for 51, exposing a wide open triple word score. If David uses that spot, Nigel's odds of playing a bingo next turn through the letters of Tranciest are very good. Instead, David immediately draws a second bingo of his own in that area of Insolent for 70 to stay ahead, and Nigel doesn't connect on a bingo of his own, playing Dimble for 42 to use up the dangerous triple before David can. David draws the last S, and just as Nigel did previously with Yup, here David plays Gov for just 7, creating a huge S hook that will be very difficult to block. After Dimble, Nigel draws what looks like a weak rack, but the T of Tranciest saves him as he's able to get down Facetiae for 67. While I suspect David would play Vergers for 91 against most players, if he has any doubt whatsoever against Nigel, he can play Grievers instead for 17 fewer points, which he does. Those extra points could be crucial in such a close game, but Grievers does eliminate the last realistic bingo lines for Nigel. If Nigel has the F or P, he could score a ton in this spot, but with neither of those in hand, he's forced to open a new threat with Wino. And David has just enough consonants to answer with Woof for 42 to stay ahead. He could still be in trouble if Nigel has a 5-letter P word here, but Nigel's endgame rack contains only one vowel, which proves fatal. After an optimal endgame from both players, David squeaks out the win 470 to 452, winning the quarterfinal match and ending Nigel's tournament hopes. David Eldar would go on to win his next 2 matches en route to his first World Championship title, a feat which he would repeat in 2023. Having to defeat Scrabble's final boss in 2 absolute classics to pull it off surely made it that much more satisfying.